edition of Mainly NBA. Today, we're going to be discussing the James Harden trade, the Defensive Player of the Year predictions, and predictions for the Sixth Man of the Year award. What I'm going to be doing is breaking down the James Harden trade. So, first off, the main part of the deal was Brooklyn received James Harden. That was probably the most important part of this deal. I think that really raises their ceiling, and their hopes for a NBA title. James Harden is probably still a top 5 to 8 player in the league today, and you're pairing him with Kevin Durant, who's a top 5 player as well, and Kyrie Irving, who's probably a top 20 to 25 player in the NBA right now. Seem very dangerous, although they did give up Karux, who I don't know how to say his first name. They gave Karux, Jared Allen, who's a great young center, someone that's I think is blossoming into a guy that's going to be probably a top 10 center in the league very soon, if not already. They also gave up Taurean Prince, who is a decent wing player, though. He wasn't getting a ton of minutes for him, but they still gave a decent wing. And they gave a boatload of picks. They gave up 3 first-round picks and 4 pick swaps. Overall, I think it was definitely a swing for the fences. It's going to be dependent on whether or not they win a title, if this trade in hindsight is going to be looked back upon as something that was a good trade. Because obviously, if they make all these moves and they come up short of a title, they're going to be in trouble down the road. More than likely not. If they win a title in the next couple of years, KD, Kyrie, and James Harden, they probably don't already sign. Then they have no assets or draft capital in order to build on. So that's going to be really tough for them. So as far as the stuff that Brooklyn's actually gave up in this deal, their biggest piece of like the actual physical person they gave up was definitely Jared Allen. He is someone that has potential to be an all-star caliber center. Like he's a guy, he's a great rim runner, great rim protector. He's a pretty good rebounder as well. So losing him is going to hurt, especially because now I don't know who their backup center is. I think it's Jeff Green at this point, because they have DeAndre Jordan starting, who, I mean, he is showing his age. He's looking like an old center that's had a lot of minutes played. And they also gave up Karux, who I don't really know a whole ton about. I don't think he hasn't played really a whole lot. And then Taurean Prince, he's a decent wing player. All that really does is that hurts their depth at the wing, just makes them a little bit thinner there. As far as picks go, they're giving up 3 first-round picks, all unprotected, and they give up 4 pick swaps. So they're just swapping. So whoever has the better pick that year between them and Houston gets that pick. So that's a lot of stuff you're giving up. So if this doesn't pan out, if this winds up being one of those situations where they make this big giant move and they wind up, say, next 2 years they don't win a championship, or they don't even make it past the Eastern Conference Finals, that will be a serious, this will look like a really bad trade in hindsight, because they are just completely obliterating all their depth. They lost a great young player in Jared Allen, and they lost like their draft picks for the next essentially 8 years with pick swaps as well. So it was a big home run move, but this is one we're gonna have to wait and see how this team gels together, and if they are able to win a championship, it's clearly all worth it. So next we have the Houston Rockets, who they received a boatload in this trade. They received, like I said earlier, they received the 3 first-round picks from Brooklyn, unprotected. They received 4 pick swaps, and they received Milwaukee's first-round pick in not this upcoming draft, but the following draft in 2022 from the Cavs. They also receive Victor Oladipo from the Pacers, and they get Dante Exum and Karux as part of that 4-team deal. As far as the players they received, Exum and Oladipo are on expiring contracts. They might want to re-sign Oladipo. I'm not really sure. It seems like with the move they made, they could have got more talent. So I think they're going to try and go into rebuild after this year, build around like Christian Wood. But they could easily resign him. Karux isn't, I think he's got 1 more year left on his deal, but he's barely making any money, so that doesn't really affect anything. But going forward, I think this was a good deal.
in order to A, be somewhat competitive this year, but two, it puts them in a good position for a very quick rebuild. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is the Cavs. I think the Cavs got a great deal out of this. They sent the Bucks 2022 pick, which with Giannis resigning, it's probably going to be somewhere like no better than like 25, 26. So it's probably going to be a pick in the upper 20s, even into the 30s, depending on how well the Bucks do. But so that's almost like giving up a second round pick. But so they gave up that. They gave up Dante Exum, who wasn't really. He's an okay. He's a backup point guard, but it's not really a big deal. He wasn't really part of their future, anyways. They received Jared Allen, who fits very well with their young core. Darius Garland and Colin Sexton. They are two very good guards who I think they're going to try and build around. They also have Isaac Okoro. And Jared Allen, I believe, is only 22 years old, so he fits very well with that timeline as opposed to Andre Drummond, who's on an expiring deal, and they're probably not looking to resign him.
And lastly, we have the Indiana Pacers. They traded Oladipo and they got back LeVert and a second round pick. Now, LeVert, I think he's a very solid player. I think the reason for making this move is Oladipo's expressed his displeasure towards the Pacers in the past, and I think there's very low chance that he was re-signing with them. So I think they basically were like, okay, well, we're not gonna be able to re-sign him. We don't want to get him for nothing. So let's get this young guard that maybe wants to stay here after realizing, hey, I can kind of run the show, be the number one man in the backcourt, be able to score some points, and in hopes that they're able to continue building around their core that they have there right now and be competitive this year and years going forward, and hope that they maybe hit on someone that falls to the mid to the late teens or so, late like into the early 20s, that winds up becoming a very productive player and winds up kind of putting them up a tier into that going from good to great in the Eastern Conference. And now we have the Defensive Player of the Year award. So the biggest, the biggest or most common denominator I saw with the Defensive Player of the Year award winners was actually defensive rating. Defensive rating is how many points you allow per 100 possessions. And I looked back on the past 3 years of winners, which was Rudy Gobert twice and then Giannis this past season. And in those years, the Jazz ranked 1 and 2 in defensive rating, and the Bucks ranked number 1 in defensive rating last season. So I took that information and I basically looked at the top 10 in defensive rating and adjusted defensive rating in case one team maybe had like a cupcake schedule so far in this year. I tried to look for the teams that were in both of those that both just regular defensive rating adjusted. And then I tried to look at the players who in the past have made all defensive teams or are considered good to great defenders. And that is kind of what I made my criteria as. And that helped me narrow the list really down to about 4 players. 4 for this award is Ben Simmons. The Sixers are off to a good start and they're playing incredibly good defense. Ben Simmons is a guy who I believe made first team all defense last year, and he's a very versatile defender. I think this award typically favors big men. Some might heard him in the past. I know Giannis won it last year. He might not be considered a big man, and Kawhi's won it, and guys like that have won it. But I think this award is typically tailored towards big men. So that is why I have him at number 4.
3, we have Miles Turner. Their team not necessarily is like one of the best. They're just outside the top 5 in defensive rating, adjusted defensive rating, which I know all these advanced analytics. But what had Turner stick out to me is I'm sure if you watch Turner, you understand he's an incredible shot blocker. He's a good defender, and he's very high in defensive win shares and defensive box plus minus. And their team still is a very good defensive team, just not a great defensive team at this point in time, which could change. They lost Oladipo, who's a good defender, but LeVert might be a bit downgrade defensively, but I still think they'll be fine defensively. And he's putting up some very impressive, some almost unreal numbers as far as shot blocking to this point. I have Turner at number 3, just because mostly it's his team's defense isn't as good as the other guys I'm going to mention.
At number 2 for the Defensive Player of the Year award, I have Joel Embiid. Like I said earlier with Simmons, they have an incredible defensive team. But I think having Simmons being an elite defender might hurt him, might take some votes away from him. But Embiid has been a monster on both sides of the ball. He looks like he's really trying hard on defense. I think he maybe took that as a slight that he just didn't make any defensive team last year. I think he wants to be known as a staunch defender, not someone that can be scored upon very easily. So I think he, as Michael Jordan would say, he took that personally. But I think for the rest of the season, I think he can maintain this level of play. I think his team can maintain this level of play. And I think he's got a very good shot for this award. I just don't think he's my leading candidate at this point in time.
Number 1, I have Anthony Davis. The Lakers right now are number 1 in defensive rating, so they're allowing the fewest points per 100 possessions. They're number 2 in adjusted defensive rating. So they're a very good defensive team. They were a very good defensive team last year. I will think that they'll continue to be up there, probably in the top 3 at the lowest, no matter what moves might be made throughout this year. And then I was looking, so after I looked at that, I looked at really the Lakers' impact, and clearly we know Anthony Davis is a great defender. He's been a contender for the Defensive Player of the Year award. He's been a first-team All-NBA defender in the past, and I think this is the year he really breaks out and wins that award, which would be, I think, very great for his legacy going forward as he's building that, trying to make that Hall of Fame resume. I think he's got a Hall of Fame talent. Now he just needs to start collecting those accolades. With Anthony Davis, he's a very versatile defender. He can guard power forwards and centers, no problem. He's a great rim protector. He's a good rebounder. And you put him in pick and roll, you're not going to be able to take advantage of him if he gets switched onto a smaller guard. You know, he might not be the quickest guy in the world, but he's very athletic for a big man. And that's why I think Anthony Davis is going to win the Defensive Player of the Year award. So next up, we have the Sixth Man of the Year award. This award was tough, especially with Caris LeVert moving. I'm assuming he's going to go to the bench now. I mean, to a starting role as opposed to the bench like he was mostly for the Nets when Kyrie was playing. So he was one of the candidates I originally thought was going to be competing for this award, but I've made a top 3. The stats that I used were based off before last night's games, but they were all numbers from when they played on the bench. So if you look up their stats and their stats might not match, it's for the reason that I look to see what their bench numbers were, because this is the Sixth Man of the Year award. So I'm trying to figure out exactly the criteria they usually use for this, and I'm assuming it's how productive you are when you're in that bench role. Of course, if you're very productive when you do get a spot start, I think that impacts it. But I tried to just look at their bench numbers at this point of the year. 3, I have the defending Sixth Man of the Year award winner in Montrezl Harrell. Montrezl Harrell's putting up some pretty good numbers this year. Off the bench, which, I mean, he's a guy that's accustomed to being an incredible bench scorer, a bench rebounder, and he's continuing to put up those numbers on a very successful team. I really tried to... He's not quite having the numbers he had last year, but he's not scoring maybe as much as some of the other bench players that I'm going to mention later on, a couple of the other guys, but you know, he's doing a solid role. He's an incredible bench big, which you don't see a whole lot of bench bigs that have that impact like Harrell does. I think we've shown in the past that he can keep up this pace of what he's going on, and I think the success of the Lakers will be very helpful to his case, but I still have him at number 3.
At number 2, we have Goran Dragic from the Miami Heat. Dragic has not yet started a game this year, but I think there are questions on whether or not he might get moved to that starting role, as the Heat have gotten off to a kind of a slow start this year. But despite the Heat's slow start, Dragic has played really well. He's averaged about 15 points off the bench and about 5 assists, which is, I mean, very good numbers for a bench point guard. But I don't think if the team continues to struggle and be a 500 team, I think it might be hard for him to win this award. You typically see this award won by teams that are good teams, unless they have a guy that's putting up just unreal numbers off the bench. There are cases like a few years ago, Lou Will. But no, Dragic, I mean, despite his age, he's playing very well. He's been very efficient. He's putting up right now close to 50, 40, 90 numbers, which is awesome. If he keeps that up with the efficiency, he keeps putting up the counting numbers, and the team's success kind of starts to turn around. They start getting to what we expect the Miami Heat to be. I think there's a very good shot he wins this award.
My prediction for the winner of the Sixth Man of the Year award is Jordan Clarkson from the Utah Jazz. Now, Clarkson is averaging 17 points. He's averaging 4.5 boards and 1.5 assists on 50, 40, 90 shooting, which is incredible for a bench player. If he's able to keep his pace up and the Jazz continue to stay good, I think there's a really good shot he wins this award. There's always that chance maybe they move him to a starting role because he's playing so well, but that's like that with any candidate for Sixth Man of the Year award. But I think they're going to continue to utilize him off the bench, and I think if they do and he keeps putting up the numbers he's putting up, I think that he comes away with this award. For watching, I'll try to be back next Saturday again, try and keep this a weekly thing, doing drops next Saturday. I'll do most improved prediction. That's going to be a really tight race, and Coach of the Year award. But thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.